Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Torres, with my other host, or our other host, Efrain Rosario. Hi, Efrain.
Hello, Daniel. Good to be with you as always.
So, quick pub quiz for you now that we're actually recording on a Thursday, which is a typical pub quiz day. Which market of the world or which region would you say has 40 different markets within it?
Ah, uh, that's a good question. Which one? Which one is it, Daniel? Tell me.
Well, it's no other than Latin America.
It's impressive. I mean, as somebody who is actually born and part of that part of the world, I'm actually kind of blown away with that number. But it does actually really help illustrate, just the diversity of not just culture, but I think just in terms of business development in that part of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Because you have like the Southern Cone, you have Brazil, you have the North Andean countries, you have the whole Caribbean, you have Central America. Goodness, I mean, a lot of complexity there. Today, we're actually going to speak about a specific aspect of Latin America, which is that its maturity when it comes to digital. So our guest today is Sharon Lewis, who's heading up digital and data for Latin America at Kimberly Clark. So we'll be very interested to know a couple of things from her, especially. One is how she manages the complexity of a region with many speeds. And secondly, how she interacts with headquarters to get resources for a region that can sometimes be a bit of an afterthought.
Hi, I'm Sharon Lewis, and I am the head of data and digital in Latin America for Kimberly Clark.
So, Sharon, thanks for joining us, and would love to hear more about, in essence, what got you to where you are today in regards to working in digital, but also in terms of Kimberly Clark and some of the other companies and other places you've stopped and you've worked at over your career.
Great. So I think I've always been in digital marketing data, but I've been in very different companies, very different sectors. So I started at Colombia. I am Colombian. I started for a digital agency here in Colombia. It was the biggest digital agency in Latin America. And then I decided to move to the US, to San Francisco. And there I got my master's degree. And then I started working for SurveyMonkey, something completely different from marketing. I was actually part of the methodology team. So understanding how to ask the right questions so you can get the right answers. Then worked for EA Sports, for FIFA in North America. I also had some experience in Edelman, the PR agency. So something completely different. Again, very digital. Decided to move to Boston. Apparently, I needed more of the US, so I moved to Boston. I got some certifications at Harvard, but I also worked for a data company for a car insurance, like a car insurance company. So that was very interesting. A lot of data crunching for car insurance. And then I decided to move back to Colombia, where I started working for Diageo. And then I was part of the Latin America team, the digital team, and then I was part of the eCommerce global team at Diageo. And then I decided to move to Kimberly very recently, I would say 8-9 months ago. And now I'm heading all of the data and digital teams in Latin America, and it has been fantastic, a big learning experience.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing to hear about all the different industries and, in essence, kind of like types of companies that you've worked with. But it sounds like digital and data has been, in essence, a common thread across most of your experiences in your career.
Yes, I love it. Data, I would say my hobby, my baby. Every time I'm very stressed, I would crunch data. So this is funny. My team is like, "Are you actually doing that?" Yes, I crunch data for fun. But then digital is the way I can use that data, right? So digital is the way we can use all of this data to make an impact into the organization. But yes, very different companies. My friends were very jealous when I was working for FIFA, and we actually were forced to play FIFA on our work days.
Wow.
Funny story is that was not my favorite part of the day, but apparently a lot of people would fancy that.
Yeah, for sure. I have a friend that loves to play FIFA. He even records himself on TikTok playing
Yeah.
FIFA and on Twitch. So I'm sure he would love to be paid for that.
You might get a couple people following up with you after this podcast asking, like, how do I find a job where I get to play?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think I was lucky. But yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
Yeah. I used to play Pro Evolution Soccer, which is the big rival of FIFA. So there you go. I don't think many jobs would pay you to play Pro Evolution Soccer. But Sharon, you're like part of like why we want to invite you here is to explain like digital transformation, specifically in Latin America. But going back to the basics, how would you define digital transformation?
I think that's a very interesting question, as I would say from my experience in all of the companies that I've been, and I think this is going to be very opposite from what you will find on Wikipedia or ChatGPT of what digital transformation would be. But I really want to say this, that I read some time ago on Harvard Business Review, and they were saying that digital transformation is about people and not technology. And I fully agree with that. I think digital transformation, it's a cultural change that allow companies to transform the way they do things, evolve the way they do things, the processes, their experiences with their customers, their clients. And that cultural change is supported by technology. And it's pretty interesting because I think most people would think that it's quite the opposite, right? It's like a technological transformation that will follow by a cultural change, but I think it's quite the opposite. You do nothing just with the technology, you do need to have that transformation.
So have you found that, I guess, in your experiences at companies like Kimberly Clark and Diageo, as you're in essence helping to lead the digital transformation, for example, what is the role of culture and other critical success factors in terms of building capabilities in those kinds of companies?
Um, I think I'm going to start with the way I think the digital transformation works, and I'm oversimplifying this. I would say there are two steps. First step is when you go digital, right? And that's when you start digitizing your current processes. So you do the same, you just automate or digitize everything you do. And then after that, and the step we all want to get to is when you become digital or you are digital. And that's when you transform the way you do business, right? It's not just digitizing, just automating everything you do. I would say this is when you actually start taking different decisions, start going into new business models that you didn't in the past because of technology or this transformation that you go to. But that nothing happens if you don't have the cultural part, if you don't have people actually wanting to move forward and wanting to transform the way things are. And I would say for me, one of the key things that I've done in the companies that I've been is I always find sponsors on the exec level, right? So leaders that are sponsoring this agenda. And I would say I work with them, I work for them, I make them shine on this, like with this data, with this transformation. And the funny thing about that is that very, very easily the rest will follow, right? Because they're shining, because they're succeeding, and they're using this transformation, this data, this technology, these new teams to do that their peers are going to start asking, like, what are they doing? What's happening? And that's what I think it's really, really important. And that's why I think it's a cultural thing, because it's just people gravitating towards something and really wanting to change the way things are. I
Yeah.
would say it's like,
And I think it's important that to have that buy-in from executive teams, but it's also important for executive teams to realize that they'll have to change a lot of ways of doing things to make that change happen, right? Because I have found people that have been hired for a transformational role, and when they gave guidelines to the executive team of what needed to be changed, those were not prepared to do it, and then it doesn't work either, right?
yeah. The good thing on CPG, I would say, is that all of the CEOs are getting so many questions from their investors about what are you doing on transformation? What are you doing with e-commerce? So I would say a few years ago, that was not the case. So it was a little bit harder. But now all of these investors, that's everything they want to know besides the financials, right? So I think it has become a little bit easier as they're getting these questions from the top, from the boards. And now they're more curious on, okay, what's happening? Where do we need to go? How can we accelerate it? But you're right.
Yeah. And speaking about data, but also digital transformation, how do you blend, like when you look at the consumer and you have to come with different strategies to approach them, how do you blend like new performance-based data with customer insights, like the typical research to deliver like proper customer insights?
Yeah. I would say I'm a big fan of this big traditional insights and reports and consumer panels. They're great. I love them. I think you can get a lot of data from them. The opportunities that those have is cost, of course, and then the time. So you cannot run a consumer panel every other day. You would run them every, I don't know, 6 months, a year. It depends on the company. So I think those more traditional reports and that more traditional way of understanding consumer and customers are great. However, you can fill in the blanks or the gaps of those with more real time and digital data, right? So, for example, I don't know, market share. You can buy market share every month, every 2 months, every 3 months, depending on your company. But then there are smaller indicators. I call them the leading indicators, like share of search, for example, how many times someone would look for your brand on Google or any search engine that will give you ideas on how your market share will come, right? Will move. So if these are going up, you know that your market share might go up. And then if a lot of people are not looking for your brand, you might know that you will have an impact on your market share. So I would say mixing them both. I don't think one is going to replace the other one, but I think this data models or these leading indicators, like I call them, they are the answer to have real-time data to understand what is it that is happening. So, okay, my market share, it's coming down. Can I predict what's going to happen? Can I understand what's happening? Can I see why consumers are shifting their preferences? So I say it's just like mixing both.
Yeah.
Social listening is great, right? D2C, it's my favorite. You have a huge engine of data, of consumer knowledge there that is fantastic to understand what's going to happen to your consumers.
Yeah. I love the way you set that up, which is in essence, you fill the gaps, between, let's call it the more traditional, research type of insights with these digital pulses with, in some cases, real time information around people's habits. So, I think a lot of us in this space probably can stand to think about it in that way in terms of like, the question that I often hear the most is, how do you combine, or how do these things fit together? Right. So it's like, you're telling me you have this here from our D2C platform, and, like you said, from other, let's call it more digital type of platforms. And then I have my traditional research, and like, how do I, in essence, fit those pieces together as in the puzzle? So I love the way you kind of teed that up in terms of thinking about it in terms of, pulses along the way. But there's some art and science with that for sure.
It is. And I think what we need to think, it's not going to be perfect. Well, no data model is going to be perfect, but I think it's going to give us direction on where we should look at, where we need to
Mhm.
go. And that's also part of the transformation, right? That mindset of it's not perfect, it's going to be directional, it's not going to be prescriptive. I don't think any model is going to ever be 100% accurate. But it's just like finding data that will work, that will help you to anticipate what's happening, to bulletproof your company a little bit. And so many things happening out there, so many free data, I would say. You just need someone to understand how to use that data. But yeah, I think they
Yeah.
both work together.
Well, and I love the way you've also talked about, that it's, if you strive for perfection, you'll be waiting quite a long time. So adopting a more of a build, test, learn type of approach in regards to data acquisition, but also then data analytics and data modeling is a good way to go about it. So I'd love to get your perspective as well, given your role, particularly now at Kimberly Clark as head of digital and data for LATAM. I'm assuming that, a big part of your role is also building capabilities across the different markets in your region. Um, from a commercial perspective, how do you approach those different levels of maturity uh, that vary by market, and how do you, in essence, adapt your approach and how you build capabilities and how you partner with those markets based on those different levels?
Yes, in Latin America, I would say we have, if we include the Caribbean and Central America, we have more than 40 different countries in this region, and you would have, yeah, quite a lot, right? You have markets like Brazil, which is it has a huge population. It has a very high maturity in terms of digital data, e-commerce. But also, you would have smaller markets in Central America that are pretty small, pretty nascent, that you would also need to pay attention to. So do you remember that I said that I love crunching data as a hobby? So I am a big fan of maturity assessments. I don't think one size fits all. Crazy about bubble charts, just mixing whatever data you have available to understand the maturity levels of your market. So that would be the first thing that I always do when I start a job. Like, have this maturity assessment of all of my markets, depending on if it's data or digital or e-commerce or even market participation, like market share. Like, it would depend. And then I would create four or three groups, right? So I would have my more advanced markets, and all of the innovation would go there. Most of my money would go there. So I would prioritize based on business impact. And a lot of things are going to happen on those big markets. And then for the smaller markets, a lot of basic foundations will happen, right? So this is the way you do things. This is the picture of success. This is how you jump into the next stage of your transformation. So I think finding where all of the markets are and then having a plan as a region, but again, really having these clusters of markets so you can do completely different things of in them, I think would be the key for that. Um, and then creating a phase strategy. So what happens when you crawl? So maybe a smaller Central America market would be crawling, but then what happens when you fly? I don't know. Is it Brazil, the market where you're flying? What's happening there? What's the innovation there? What are you testing there? So again, just finding those clusters of markets and having differentiated strategies.
And you're doing obviously it at Kimberly Clark, but at Diageo, there's I think that there's some DTC at Diageo, for example, but I know that mainly you're doing your e-commerce through steering retailers. Can you tell us maybe a bit about that? What's the landscape like? Like, how are the retailers in different countries in the region? I mean, we can't go over all of the 40, but in the different countries in the region, how are they acting with e-commerce? Like,
Yes. So I would say the good thing that we have in Latin America is that the big ones are across the big markets, like Rappi, for example.
yeah,
It's a Colombian, I don't even call it startup at this point, but it's this Colombian company, this super app that started in Colombia, and now it's spread out across Latin America. So it is pretty easy, as you have one company and then you can do things across borders.
yeah.
Mercado Libre, it's another one. It's a huge one that we have across different markets. Amazon, we have it in Brazil, we have it in Mexico. So you can also do those kind of things. And then locally, you're gonna find a lot of key players doing different things, fantastic things, moving really, really fast. So I would say prioritizing your big bets and then just leaving enough space to experiment, to move forward the small ones, to understand where that future growth is gonna come on the small ones is a huge opportunity. But yes, I would say this is a case for a lot of CPGs where most of their e-commerce contribution will come from third parties, from retailers, from pure players, marketplace, etc. But there is still room for direct to consumer.
Mm-hmm.
So in Latin America, we have a direct to consumer site for Huggies. It's called masabrazos.com, which is like more huggies.com. Yeah. In English, it is a huge bet for our company, I think it's fantastic because we can connect directly with our consumers, right? Something that in the past was a little bit harder when you're doing it through third parties or retailers. So I think D2C, there's a lot of controversial around that. If it's dying, if it's not dying, I love it. I'm a big fan of it. I'm a big fan of what you can learn from your consumers on direct to consumer, and also a big fan of using it as an innovation lab. So that's a little bit of how it works for Kimberly, and I would say for a lot of CPG companies out there.
Mm-hmm. And what about like the traditional brick and mortar retailers? I don't know, like in Brazil, you have Pão de Açúcar, you have Carrefour. Yeah, forget about the other countries. A lot of them are Mexico. You have Walmart, you have Soriana as well. How active are these players, more traditional players, being in e-commerce?
They're very active. And in Latin America, we also have Walmart. For example, Walmart and Walmart.com. In Central America, it's the biggest player there, Walmart. So it is pretty interesting because even though we're still selling on their .coms, it's really helping us to understand a little bit more that omni-channel strategy, right? So it's not you have one person taking care of the brick and mortar store and then the other one taking care of the .com. It's like us as organizations really understanding how we can be one acting as omni-channel. So I would say we're also accelerating with them pretty hard. It's a little bit harder because we don't have like one across all of the markets. So you do have to have more local negotiations and more local relationship with them. But it's fantastic how you can learn how people are actually doing this omni-channel journey, and learning with them is great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about, how in essence these traditional retailers who may, to be fair, may not be as nimble as the startups or the grocery.com part of the ecom business, but they can really serve as a great place to learn around omni-channel execution, right? So it's not just about, like you said, what you do in offline versus what you do online. It's about how those things all kind of work together in the grand scheme of, in essence, engaging and converting shoppers in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it is. And you would be impressed on how a lot of these companies are rethinking themselves as technology companies, which I think it's great. They're not only retailers now. They're like, we want to be technology companies like Walmart, but I'm talking about like retailers here in Latin America. They're really trying to move forward. They're really trying to go with pace. And it's a learning experience for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about to be like successful, Sharon, in these type of roles? You have to obviously drive resources from global, and you're in Latin America, which sometimes feels like a bit of an afterthought for these global corporations. How have you managed to interact with headquarters effectively to get the resources you need to be successful?
Yeah, that is the case. In a lot of companies, that Latin America is not the biggest source of growth.
Especially
Yes, exactly. I would say the good thing is I already been part of the global teams, so I already cracked the code. I know how to ask for resources. But I would say, yes, Latin America is smaller. Latin America doesn't have a lot of resources like North America, for example, or even Europe in some companies. However, the good things that we have in Latin America is because we are smaller, we're able to move faster. So the way I would sell it to my headquarters or to my global teams is I can run a lot of tests in here. I can do a lot of things. Like companies are moving fast in here, startups, retailers, they're moving really fast. So they can see Latin America as their innovation lab, because our processes are not as heavy as other regions. I don't know, like North America. We can take the freedom to go and experiment with new things. So that's the way I would see it. Just coming to Latin America, experiences a lot of things. You can take that to Asia Pacific. You can take that to EMEA, because we have like the structure might be similar, having different countries, different languages. So just use Latin America as an innovation lab. And I think that has worked for me in the past and still is working. So we do test a lot of new things here, and we can move faster here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you said, I think a lot of companies, and not just LATAM, right? There's other parts of the world where, whether it be e-com or whether it be other parts of the business, being outside of HQ can actually serve to your advantage in regards to being able to move more quickly, take more educated risks, if you will, when it comes to certain things as well. So it's great to hear that, you've in essence been able to adopt that approach quite successfly at a couple of the places you've been. Would love to hear from you in regards to, you mentioned culture at the beginning and, how it was a critical part of how you see and define digital transformation. Can you tell me a little bit about, and tell our audience a little bit about what you see as the key elements of building a performance-based culture, which is obviously so critical when you think about a space like e-com?
Yes. I would say the first thing that I always do is I start at the top. And basically, if it's a priority for your boss, it will be a priority for you. So starting and getting that support and that sponsorship from the top management is the most important thing to start. That then things are going to slowly start to integrate and get inertia in the other teams. The second thing, and this is funny because this is part of my data strategy and my ambition, is to make data less scary. That sounds funny. But then data and everything related to this transformation tends to get very technical very soon. And then people will get scared of that, right? So I would say that if you try to take out that very techie and rocket science part of this transformation and of data and try to make it a little bit more business oriented. So this is how data, or this is how digital, or this is how this transformation is really going to help you with your personal objectives. I mean, your objectives as an employee. So market share, operating profit, whatever it is. So you can say, this is how I'm going to contribute to that. I think it becomes less scary. So that would be the second one, like taking out that technological rocket science part of that. I would say that at the beginning, usually you won't have a big team of people. So maybe trying to find a team of people that is really going to help you to permeate the structure, to actually get to a lot of people, to actually go and repeat your message, to sit on the business meetings, I think that's what presidents do, right? They repeat. So that's exactly what you need to do. You have to sit in every meeting. You have to tell them the value that you're bringing. You have to help them with their data. So I would say having a team of people at the beginning supporting you with that transition, it's going to be important, without forgetting that eventually in a couple of years, 2 to 5 years, you would need to make a transition plan where these capabilities are not only from a group of people, but these capabilities are going to be part of everyone out there. So I would say those are like my 3 big things on how to change a little bit the performance and the culture.
What about, Sharon, if you went with at the beginning of the conversation, we spoke about your trajectory across, being in North America and going to global roles, LATAM roles. If you went back to the beginning of your career and with what you know now had to give yourself a piece of advice, which one would that be?
I would say don't be afraid. And don't be afraid. I'm talking about not only to make mistakes, because I think a lot of people are already having that mindset of it's okay to make mistakes. But I would say don't be afraid to speak up your mind. Don't be afraid to talk to senior leaders. Don't be afraid to build relationships. Again, this is about people and not only technology. And then I would say don't forget to enjoy the ride, because the ride changes every other hour, I would say. So that would be my advice to my younger self.
This was Sharon Lewis from Kimberly Clark. Efrain, what are your key takeaways from this conversation on digital data, Latin America?
Well, I guess first off, I'm always impressed when I hear somebody say that data is their hobby. And Sharon
Me too.
said, that data is her hobby and digital is how she uses it. So that's pretty impressive when you find rest and calm in an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, especially for me, who I'm a person who used to fail maths in high school, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Well, I think, everybody has their own way of self-care. So,
Exactly.
definitely kudos to Sharon for sharing that. And I think she's probably going to find a lot of people who are in that tribe as well,
Yeah.
in our audience.
Yeah, I think that also she combines that acumen for numbers, digital and data with a very good business acumen and influencing acumen, in the way that she has very clear that she has to be successful, she needs to influence stakeholders locally, but also at a global level, and that duality or that you need to manage, right?
Yeah. Well, I think, it comes down to, I think that, Sharon demonstrates a lot of insight in terms of understanding the role of people and culture as part of digital transformation. So she referenced that early on in our conversation, and I think it actually was something that we came back to at several points as we were talking with her.
Yeah, exactly. One other thing that surprised me on another page is that they're actually doing quite a lot of stuff in direct to consumer. So she mentioned like the Haggis platform they have for direct to consumer called Más Abrazos. So that was quite interesting in a region where you would suppose that didn't happen. And also the fact that they have regional players, which is something that in Europe, for example, apart from Amazon, you don't have much of when you talk about like grocery shopping.
Well, I think, it really kind of in essence brings to life the point she made, which is thinking of D2C, but I think even more generally, LATAM as a region as an innovation lab.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're in a global role, while it may not represent the scale or let's say the level of maturity of a US or even, parts of Europe and specifically in ecom, Asia, LATAM, what it brings to the table is the opportunity to move fast and be agile, and really serve that role of being a place where you can test and learn and move quickly in trying new things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was a very interesting conversation with Sharon Lewis. So thanks, Sharon, again for coming to the show. Thanks to our audience for engaging and listening to us. Remember, you can follow all our content on our LinkedIn page. We're adding more and more different content every day of the week practically now. So you should definitely follow it. And if you can, show us your support by liking, commenting, sharing with your network, who I think can benefit from the platform that we're building. Thanks also to the CPG guys for the content you produce as well, and for being a great inspiration and learning platform for ourselves. And we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG guys. Have a great day.